In January 1936, a farmer outside Bismarck, North Dakota, lost power for 19 days straight. Temperatures hit 40 below. He had a wife and 4 children under the age of 10. Every one of them survived. He used techniques his mother taught him during the worst years of the Depression. Number 14 on this list kept an entire Appalachian mining town warm when the coal ran out. Number 6 was classified by the Army Corps of Engineers as a legitimate emergency heating method. And number 3, a trick so simple it sounds fake, was recently validated by researchers at the University of Minnesota. These 20 hacks were common knowledge for an entire generation. Then central heating arrived and we forgot all of them. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 20 Depression-era winter survival hacks that could save your family when the grid fails. Number 20, newspaper wall insulation. Before fiberglass bats and spray foam existed, families in the rural Midwest insulated their homes with the one thing they had in abundance: newspapers. They would take stacks of the daily paper, unfold each sheet, and tack them flat against the interior walls using flour paste or small nails. Layer after layer, sometimes 10 sheets deep, until the wall felt padded to the touch. The trapped air between each layer created a dead air space, which is exactly how modern insulation works. A year's worth of newspapers cost nothing. The flour paste was a penny's worth of flour mixed with water. Families in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas papered their walls every October as routinely as they stacked firewood. When you pulled the wallpaper off old farmhouses during renovations in the 1970s and the 1980s, you found layers of newsprint dating back to the 1930s. Headlines about Roosevelt and dust storms pressed against the studs like a time capsule. The technique reduced heat loss through thin plank walls by as much as 30%. That was the difference between a livable house and a dangerous one, when the only heat source was a single stove in the front room. Number 19, the hay bale windbreak. When winter storms bore down on prairie homesteads, the north side of the house took the worst punishment. Wind drove through every crack and gap in the siding, stealing heat faster than the stove could replace it. During the Depression, families solved this by stacking hay along the exterior north wall, from the ground to the windowsill. The bales acted as a massive insulating buffer, cutting wind exposure and trapping warm air against the foundation. Stacking a few bales took an afternoon, and the difference was immediate. Families reported rooms on the north side of the house going from unbearable to tolerable overnight. A bale of hay cost about 15 cents in 1934. Most families already had them for livestock. Some banked straw or leaves against the foundation instead, packing it tight and covering it with old canvas or tar paper to keep it dry. The principle was the same: create a barrier between the wind and the wall and let the dead air do the work. Number 18, the soapstone bed warmer. Electric blankets did not exist for most Americans until the 1950s. Hot water bottles leaked, but a soapstone slab heated on the wood stove and wrapped in flannel would hold warmth for 6 to 8 hours. Families kept flat soapstones, roughly the size of a bread loaf, on top of the stove all evening. Before bed, they would wrap the stone in old cloth and slide it under the covers at the foot of the bed. Children doubled up in beds during cold snaps, and the soapstone between them radiated gentle heat through the night. The stone cost nothing if you found one. Hardware stores sold purpose-made ones for about 25 cents. They lasted forever. No electricity, no fuel, no ongoing cost. Just stored thermal energy released slowly where you needed it most. Some families had 3 or 4 of them, rotating them on and off the stove in shifts. A grandmother in Vermont recalled in 1978 that she did not sleep without a soapstone at her feet until she was 40 years old. Some families heated 2 stones, one for the feet and one held against the chest under the blankets. The warmth was gentle and constant, nothing like the harsh blast of a modern space heater. It radiated through the cloth wrapping like a slow pulse. Children fought over who got the warmest stone. Number 17. Sealing windows with flour paste and cloth strips. Weather stripping was a luxury. Caulk was expensive, but every farmhouse had flour and old bed sheets. Women would tear sheets into strips about 2 inches wide, mix flour and water into a thick paste, and press the cloth strips over every window seam and crack where cold air leaked in. The paste dried hard overnight, sealing gaps that single-pane glass could never handle on its own. In spring, the strips peeled off clean with warm water and a butter knife. The whole process cost almost nothing and took a single afternoon. This was standard practice across New England and the upper Midwest from the late 1800s through the 1940s. Hardware stores did not even bother stocking weather stripping in many rural areas because everyone already had a better solution in their kitchen. When the wind hit 30 miles an hour and snow blew sideways, those little flour paste strips were the only thing between a sleeping child and frostbite. Number 16. The root cellar cold room. Here is a hack that worked in reverse. While everyone focused on staying warm, Depression-era families also needed to keep food from freezing solid. Root cellars, dug below the frost line, maintained a temperature between 34 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit all winter long. No electricity, no thermostat, just the natural insulating properties of the earth. Families stored potatoes, carrots, turnips, cabbages, canned goods, and preserved meats down there, knowing the temperature would stay stable even when the surface dropped to 20 degrees below zero. A well-built root cellar cost nothing but labor. You dug a hole, reinforced the walls with stone or timber, added a door, and the earth did the rest. During grid failures, a root cellar became a refrigerator that never lost power. Families who had one could survive for weeks on stored provisions, while neighbors with above-ground pantries watched their canned goods freeze and burst. The engineering was ancient. The application was brilliant. Number 15. Cooking on the heating stove. When you only had one source of heat, that source did everything. The cast iron wood stove or coal stove that heated the house also cooked every meal. Depression-era families arranged their entire winter routine around the stove. A pot of beans simmered on the back plate all day. A kettle of water stayed hot for washing, drinking, and filling hot water bottles. Bread dough rose on the warming shelf above. The flat-top surface had different temperature zones. The area directly over the firebox was hottest, good for frying and boiling. The edges were cooler, good for simmering and keeping plates warm. Mothers knew every inch of that stovetop the way a chef knows a commercial range. During power outages today, people panic because they cannot use their electric stove. 100 years ago, the heating stove was the kitchen. If you have a wood stove, a pellet stove, or even a cast iron fireplace insert, you already have a cooking surface. You just forgot how to use it. First pattern break. Here is where things get serious. The Depression generation did not prepare for winter emergencies the way we do. They did not buy emergency kits from Amazon or watch survival videos on the internet. They prepared by living in a way that made emergencies survivable by default. Their homes were designed around the assumption that systems would fail. Their pantries were stocked for months, not days. Their skills were redundant. If the stove broke, they could build a fire. If the well froze, they could melt snow. If the food ran low, they could stretch what remained into something that kept everyone alive. We have replaced all of that with dependency. Dependency on the grid, on the supply chain, on systems so complex that one ice storm can shut down an entire region. The hacks on this list are not novelties. They are the baseline knowledge that every American family possessed before we traded resilience for convenience. Number 14, the shared chimney neighborhood survival system. In coal mining towns across Appalachia, winters were brutal and resources were thin. When one family ran out of coal, the system that kept them alive was not charity. It was architecture. Company houses were built in tight rows with shared walls. Heat from one stove radiated through the common wall into the next house. Families coordinated burn schedules. When the Hendersons ran their stove hot in the evening, the Millers next door banked theirs low and conserved fuel. In the morning, they switched. This informal rotation stretched a winter's worth of coal across an entire block of families. Nobody froze because nobody was truly alone. The shared wall conducted enough heat to keep a room above freezing even when no fire burned inside it. Mining companies never designed this on purpose. The families figured it out themselves. During the brutal winter of 1936, whole communities in West Virginia survived using coordinated heating schedules that cut individual coal consumption by nearly 40%. No government program taught them this. They learned it by necessity and taught it to their neighbors by example. Number 13, rendered tallow candles for heat and light. When kerosene ran low and lamp oil was too expensive, families rendered beef or mutton fat into tallow and made their own candles. The process was simple but unpleasant. Scraps of fat were simmered in water until the fat melted, strained through cheesecloth, and poured into molds with a cotton string wick. A single beef kidney's worth of fat could produce 6 to 8 candles that burned for hours. The light was dim and yellowish compared to kerosene, and the smell was not pleasant. But the heat output of 4 or 5 tallow candles burning in a small closed room was measurable. Not enough to warm a house, but enough to keep a bedroom above freezing through the night. During extended power failures in the 1930s, families who knew how to render tallow had light and supplemental heat when everyone else sat in the dark. The skill had been passed down from frontier days and was still common knowledge in rural communities. Butchers gave fat trimmings away for free. The cost was zero. The benefit was survival. Number 12, banking the stove overnight. This was perhaps the most critical skill of Depression-era winter survival and the one most thoroughly lost. Banking a fire meant loading the stove with dense, slow-burning fuel, usually hardwood or coal, closing down the air intake dampers to restrict oxygen, and letting the fire burn low and slow through the night. A properly banked stove could maintain enough heat to keep a house above freezing for 8 to 10 hours on a single load. In the morning, you opened the dampers, stirred the coals, and the fire roared back to life without relighting. The technique required practice. Too much air and the fuel burned too fast. Too little, and the fire smothered and died, leaving you to relight it in a freezing kitchen at 5 in the morning. Children were taught to bank stoves by the age of 10. It was considered a basic life skill, the same way we consider turning on a thermostat today. The difference is that banking a stove actually required understanding combustion, airflow, and fuel density. It was engineering performed by people who never used the word. Number 11, the indoor clothesline humidity system. Dry winter air made homes feel colder than they actually were. Depression-era families solved this by hanging wet laundry on indoor clotheslines strung across the warmest room in the house. As the laundry dried, moisture evaporated into the air, raising the humidity. Higher humidity makes air feel warmer at the same temperature. A room at 62 degrees with proper humidity feels more comfortable than a room at 68 degrees with bone-dry air. Families ran lines from wall to wall, draping sheets and clothing near the stove where the warm air would speed drying. The laundry got done, the air got humidified, and the house felt warmer without burning a single extra piece of wood. No electric humidifier, no special equipment, just wet cloth and warm air. Modern homes with forced air heating suffer from the same dryness, and people spend money on humidifiers that do exactly what a wet towel near a heat source does for free. Number 10, the straw tick mattress. When temperatures dropped dangerously low, what you slept on mattered almost as much as what you slept under. Depression-era families stuffed mattress casings with fresh straw or dried corn husks every autumn. The air pockets trapped in the straw created insulation beneath the sleeper, preventing body heat from being absorbed by a cold bed frame. A cotton mattress on a metal frame in an unheated room could pull warmth from a body all night. A straw tick mattress reflected it back. The casings were simple, 2 sheets of heavy ticking fabric sewn together with an opening for stuffing. A new filling of straw cost nothing on a farm. Even in towns, you could buy a bale for a dime. Families who could not afford straw used dried leaves, corn shucks, or even crumpled newspaper. The principle was identical. Put a layer of trapped air between your body and the cold surface below. Modern camping pads work on the same science. Your grandparents knew the principle 80 years earlier. Second pattern break. Here is the part nobody talks about in survival discussions. The most dangerous thing about a grid failure in winter is not cold. It is isolation. Depression-era families survived because they were connected to their neighbors in ways we are not. When the Hendersons ran out of firewood, the family across the road brought a cartload. When the widow on the corner could not get her stove lit, a neighbor's son walked over and did it for her. When the creek froze and the water supply stopped, 3 families shared one well. This was not generosity, it was strategy. Everyone understood that the family who let a neighbor freeze would be the family that had no help when their own crisis came. Modern emergency preparedness focuses almost entirely on individual self-sufficiency. Stock your bunker, buy your generator, prepare for your family. The Depression generation knew that no single family could survive a long winter alone. They survived because they built systems of mutual dependence that made the whole community stronger than any one household could be on its own. Number 9, the double window plastic seal. Glass is a terrible insulator. A single pane of window glass loses heat almost as fast as an open hole. Depression-era families who could not afford storm windows created their own double pane effect using oilcloth, wax paper, or later sheets of clear plastic tacked over the window frame, with a half-inch air gap between the glass and the covering. That trapped airspace cut heat loss through windows by nearly half. The materials cost pennies. The technique was passed from mother to daughter every October. Some families used old flour sacks dipped in linseed oil to make them translucent. Others nailed up an extra pane of glass salvaged from a broken window, creating a true double pane system for free. The AIR gap was the key. Without it, the covering conducted cold, just like the glass. With it, you had insulation that modern window manufacturers charge hundreds of dollars to replicate. Number 8, snow as emergency insulation. This sounds counterintuitive, but Depression-era families in the northern plains understood something about snow that most modern Americans do not. Snow is roughly 90% trapped air. Packed against a foundation or piled against an exterior wall, it acted as a blanket rather than a threat. Families in Minnesota and the Dakotas deliberately banked snow against the north side of their homes after storms, packing it tight against the foundation up to the windowsills. The snow layer prevented wind from directly contacting the wall and created an insulating barrier that could raise the temperature of the adjacent interior wall by 10 to 15 degrees. Igloos work on this same principle. The snow itself is not warm. The trapped air within it resists heat transfer. Depression-era farmers used this knowledge instinctively. When the blizzard hit, they did not just shovel paths. They strategically piled snow where it would do the most good. It was free, it was abundant, and it was effective. Number 7, rag rugs on bare floors. Heat loss through uninsulated floors was a constant battle in Depression-era homes. Many rural houses sat on pier foundations with nothing but open air beneath the floorboards. Cold radiated up through the planks all winter long. The solution was rag rugs, braided or woven from strips of worn-out clothing, feed sacks, and old blankets. Every scrap of fabric too damaged to wear was torn into strips, braided into long ropes, and coiled into flat, oval rugs that covered the floors of living areas and bedrooms. The rugs created a thermal barrier between bare feet and freezing floorboards. Thick braided rugs could be layered in the coldest spots. Mothers positioned the heaviest rugs near beds and in front of the stove where the family gathered. The fabric cost nothing. The labor was done during winter evenings by lamplight, hands braiding while someone read aloud or the radio played. The rugs wore out eventually, and then they were replaced with new ones made from the next year's worn-out clothing. Nothing was wasted. Everything circled back into use. A rug that took a winter to braid might last 3 or 4 years of daily wear. Then the worn-out rug was cut into strips and braided into the next one. The cycle never ended because families could not afford otherwise. Number 6, the terracotta pot and candle heater. During the worst nights when fuel ran critically low, Depression-era families discovered that an inverted terracotta flower pot placed over a lit candle could radiate enough heat to keep a small room from reaching dangerous temperatures. The candle flame heated the ceramic pot, which absorbed the thermal energy and released it slowly as radiant heat. A single large pot over 2 or 3 candles could raise the temperature of a closed bedroom by 5 to 8 degrees. It was not comfortable. It was not a replacement for a real stove, but it was the difference between frostbite and survival on the worst nights. Families in the Ohio Valley used this technique during the ice storms of 1937 when fuel deliveries stopped for over a week. The Army Corps of Engineers documented the method in a 1942 field manual on emergency shelter heating. The science is simple. Ceramic absorbs and radiates heat far more effectively than open flame alone. The pot concentrates the energy and distributes it as infrared radiation rather than convective heat, which rises uselessly to the ceiling. Number 5, layered bedding instead of thick blankets. Modern instinct says, pile on the heaviest blanket you own. Depression-era families knew that multiple thin layers outperformed one thick one every time. The reason is AIR. Each layer of fabric traps a thin layer of air between it and the next layer. That trapped air is what insulates, not the fabric itself. 5 thin blankets with air gaps between them retain body heat far more efficiently than one quilt of equivalent weight. Mothers layered sheets, then thin blankets, then quilts, then old coats on top of the bed. Some families placed a layer of newspaper between blankets for additional insulation. The newspaper crinkled when you moved, but it worked. Children slept 2 or 3 to a bed, combining body heat with layered bedding to create a warm microclimate, even in rooms where the temperature dropped into the 30s. This is the same principle used in modern sleeping bag design. Layer, trap, insulate. Your grandparents figured it out without any of the science. Number 4, the draft snake. Cold air flowing under doors was a constant enemy. Depression-era women sewed long tubes of fabric, stuffed them with sand, sawdust, dried beans, or old rags, and laid them against the base of every exterior door. These draft snakes, sometimes called draft stoppers or door sausages, blocked the gap where the largest volume of cold air entered the home. A single door with a half-inch gap at the bottom could let in enough cold air to drop the temperature of a small room by several degrees per hour. The draft snake eliminated that loss instantly. Some women made them decorative, covering them in patterned fabric or shaping them like actual snakes with button eyes. Others used old trouser legs, stuffed with whatever was handy. Function over form. The materials cost nothing. The effect was immediate. Every exterior door got one. Interior doors between heated and unheated rooms got one too. This simple technology is still the most cost-effective insulation improvement you can make to any home, and you can build one in 10 minutes with a sock and some rice. Third pattern break. Here is what survival experts will not tell you because it is not exciting enough to sell a course. The single most effective winter survival strategy the Depression generation employed was not any single hack. It was shrinking their living space. When fuel ran low, families closed off every room they did not absolutely need. They hung heavy blankets over doorways. They moved beds into the kitchen. They lived, cooked, ate, and slept in one room centered around the stove. A family of 6 in a 4-room house would retreat into a single room measuring maybe 12 by 14 feet. That room stayed warm. The rest of the house was allowed to go cold. This concentrated every bit of available heat into the smallest possible volume. It worked because these families understood something we have forgotten. You do not heat a house, you heat people. The rest is vanity. Modern Americans heat 2,500 square feet to 72 degrees so they can be comfortable in whatever room they happen to wander into. Depression-era families heated 200 square feet to 55 degrees and wore sweaters. They survived. We would too if we stopped trying to heat the whole building. Number 3. The heated brick warming method. When the stove was running, families placed common clay bricks directly on the stovetop or inside the oven to absorb heat. Once hot, the bricks were wrapped in cloth and placed inside beds, under chairs, inside coat pockets for outdoor work, or inside a box beneath the kitchen table to warm feet during meals. A single brick held usable warmth for 2 to 3 hours. Researchers at the University of Minnesota confirmed in 2019 in a study on thermal mass heating that dense clay and ceramic objects store and release heat at rates ideally suited for personal warming in low-energy environments. Depression-era families rotated bricks on and off the stove throughout the day, maintaining a constant supply of portable heat sources that required no fuel beyond what the stove was already burning. Bricks cost almost nothing. Most families had old ones lying around from a previous construction project. This technique is so old that it predates the Depression by centuries, but it reached peak use in American homes during the 1930s, when every calorie of heat mattered and nothing was taken for granted. Number 2. The haybox cooker. This was fuel conservation elevated to an art form. A haybox was simply a wooden crate or a cardboard box lined with hay, straw, old blankets, or crumpled newspaper. You would bring a pot of food to a full boil on the stove, then immediately transfer the covered pot into the insulated box and pack insulation tightly around it. The retained heat continued cooking the food for hours without any additional fuel. A pot of beans that normally required 4 hours of simmering on the stove could be boiled for 20 minutes, transferred to the hay box, and left for 6 hours. When you came back, the beans were soft and fully cooked. The stove had been free all day for heating the house instead of cooking. During winters, when fuel was desperately scarce, hay box cooking could cut wood and coal consumption by 1/3. The technique was promoted by the USDA during both World Wars and appeared in extension service bulletins distributed to rural families. It required no special materials, no special skills, and no ongoing cost, just insulation and patience. Number 1. The family bed. This is the one that sounds uncomfortable to modern ears, but it kept more families alive through Depression-era winters than every other hack on this list combined. When temperatures dropped to their most dangerous, the entire family slept together in one bed in the warmest room of the house. Parents on the outside, children in the middle. Every person generated roughly 75 watts of heat. A family of 6 produced 450 watts, the equivalent of a small space heater, contained within a cocoon of layered blankets and shared warmth. The family bed was not a sign of poverty, though it certainly accompanied it. It was a survival mechanism practiced by humans for thousands of years, before the modern era decided everyone needed their own room. In the coal fields of Pennsylvania, the tenant farms of the Mississippi Delta, and the wind-scoured homesteads of the northern plains, the family bed got people through nights that would have been fatal alone. Children recall decades later the feeling of warmth and safety in those beds, pressed between parents and siblings, while the wind screamed outside and the stove ticked as it cooled. It was not comfortable in the way we understand comfort, but everyone was alive in the morning, and that was the only metric that mattered. Here is the challenge. Pick one of these, just one. The flour paste window seal, the draft snake, the heated brick method, or the layered bedding system. Try it the next time the forecast turns ugly, not because the grid is going to fail tomorrow, but because the generation that knew these things is almost gone, and the knowledge is going with them. Every one of these hacks was tested not in a laboratory, but in real homes, by real families, during real emergencies. They worked. They still work. The only thing that changed is that we stopped believing we needed them. Share which one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the haybox cooker gets more attention than the heated bricks. I want to know if anyone else's grandfather banked snow against the foundation, because these were not just survival tricks. They were the way an entire generation refused to be beaten by winter. They knew. Now you know too.